Well, good afternoon. It's afternoon. And we are about to tape our 4 and 3 podcast. You're going to be here for a live taping of it. That's what we're about to do. Myself, Dan Andros, managing editor of Faithwire.com, with Trey Goins-Phillips from Faithwire. And yeah, we got some doozies today, Trey. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah,
It's going to be a good one.
oh man, these stories about the sexuality and the transgender stuff. It's tough because you want to be compassionate, and I think that's important. But also, it's like we're
Right.
just dismissing basic
Right.
facts.
Yeah, two plus two is not 5. 2 plus 2 is not
Yeah.
5, as much as they want me to believe it. So, all right. A lot in store. We're going to dive right in on the 4 and 3 podcast. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead on over to iTunes. Just look up the 4 and 3 podcast. If you go to faithwire.com, it's just faithwire.com. There's a podcast link there. You'll see the daily podcast. News from a Christian perspective. That's what we're doing. So here we go. We're going to fire up this podcast and get rolling. I'm not going to forget to record this time. Okay. Here we go.
Faithwire.com.
Hello and welcome to 4 and 3, a podcast breaking down 4 of the most important stories of the day and 3 things you need to know about them, all from a Christian perspective. Today is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. I'm Dan Andros. Coming up on the podcast today, a biological male has won Miss Nevada. The Washington Post gives Joe Biden 4 Pinocchios for his Second Amendment claim. We'll have the details there. And the new SBC president apologizes for plagiarism, but did we bury the lead? We'll get behind that. And also, a woman has called out an LA spa when employees, let a biological male use the women's locker room and roam around in the nude. So, crazy video there. We'll have these stories and more with Trey Goins-Phillips from Faithwire.com. Trey, what's going on?
I love a story about the patriarchy. I suppose that's what this actually is, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if we're going to go with the leftist talking point, it's men quite literally taking over women's spaces. So
Yeah, I don't
how the left is able to square that circle, I don't get.
I don't know. I mean, I think we've seen some, as we've mentioned, and we'll get into it here, but I think we've seen some people sort of realize that, wait a minute here, this is actual men invading a space. Now, I realize they have a condition where, a mental condition where they think they're the opposite sex. And so we, like you said, we try to be, we try to be empathetic to that, and we try to be kind and, as respectful as possible. But I think the lines start getting drawn when you've got naked guys walking around in locker rooms and they're just saying, well, they're trans, so what are you going to do? I think it's not going to go over well in the public, I don't think. And it didn't in this one video in this story we have coming up, which is just a crazy video. So, all right, let us dive right into story number 1. And this on Sunday, 27-year-old Cataluna Enriquez is a biological male, beat out 21 female contestants to be crowned Miss Nevada USA. Enriquez will now move on to the Miss USA pageant, which is later in November. The victory makes Enriquez the second transgender contestant to ever compete for the Miss Universe title. And a lot of outlets treating this as a first and a historical accomplishment. During the competition, Enriquez had a homemade rainbow-colored gown to celebrate Pride Month in honor of all those who don't get a chance to spread their colors. The news outlet said that by winning the crown, Enriquez is redefining what it means to be a woman and what it means to be beautiful. I think that's what a lot of people are having a problem with, as Trey just alluded to there in the pre-show. He said, I've learned to love myself, learn the beauty that's inside me, learn to use my voice and the power that I have. You're capable of anything as long as you believe in yourself. This win, Trey, comes as a TikTok user gained viral fame for having multiple surgeries to look Korean because they said they identify as Korean. And so I think that applies. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But what's the left saying of this? Well, CNN Philippines wrote, congrats, Cataluna Enriquez. She will compete for the title of Miss USA after she was crowned Miss Nevada USA. Krista Whitley wrote, Las Vegas, I present to you our new Miss Nevada USA. Is the first trans queen to go to Miss USA, but she did not win because she's trans. She won because she's a remarkable, talented, and poised woman. Many are saying this is a history in the making. That was a lot of the post. What's the right saying? Well, the tenor of the post there a little bit different. Assault on biblical definition of women. Others pointed out how more opportunities are being taken away from women. And so why does it matter? Well, Trey, I mean, we've talked about this multiple times here. Society's really leaning in on this post-truth reality, like post-truth, post-reality type world. If whatever you believe is real, then where does this end? You talk about the Korean one there. It says, well, I'm Korean, and they're having these surgeries to change their eyes. You're not Korean. You're not a Korean. I mean, it's just basic fact and reality. And so if you just say whatever, if your standard is whatever you believe is real, where does this end? Where does it end? It certainly doesn't end with a biblical definition of what, a man, male and female is, and what a biblical definition of a relationship is. Certainly not going to look anything like that.
Yeah, I guess all of this just shows that Rachel Dolezal was ahead of her time, right?
Yes.
She was claiming that she obviously, for people who don't remember, yeah, she was the NAACP a chapter president, chapter leader, whatever. And she, as it turned out, she ended up being ethnically just white. She wasn't black at all, but she claimed to be black for a long, long time. And she still says that she's part of the black community and identifies as African American, whatever. And she was just condemned like left and right, like this awful, awful, awful thing. But now, I mean, more and more people like transgenderism. It's okay for a man to claim to be a woman. I mean, that was already happening, but it just seems like it's just inescapable at this point. It's absolutely everywhere. And then this other person claiming, well, I identify as Korean, so I must be Korean. And it's just, you mentioned that people on the right are saying that it's an assault on biblical values and a biblical definition of male and female, which it is. But it's also just like even more basic than that, right? This is an assault on just like fact. Like it's just what science says about your ethnicity, what science says about your sex. Like it's just like if we can't agree on something so basic and so in your face obvious, I don't know. I don't know how we recover from that.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah. It really is this push to basically make you deny basic reality. And I think it's tough because as Christians, we do want to be generous and as amenable as possible. But without relinquishing truth. And so that's the balance there. How do we, show someone the love of Christ without, accepting something that isn't true? Because we have to do both of those things. And, culture's making that increasingly more and more difficult to do. So.
Well, and we live in this culture that's kind of like anybody who pushes back, like if you suggest like, but biologically they're a male or they're a female, it's like all of a sudden you're gaslighted into thinking like, no, you're wrong, and now you're being bigoted, you're being hateful, and it's like I can't imagine as a young person, if I was like a kid in middle school or high school or even elementary school that are having these conversations, like to ask that question and just be like shamed for wondering. I don't know, like the intellectual curiosity is pretty much flatlined at zero now in our country.
Indeed.
But like you said, it's just about being compassionate and having these conversations, and you just got to call a spade as lovingly as you can. But we've got to just be kind of honest about where we are as a culture, because it's not going to turn around unless we're actually going to call out, when stuff like this is happening.
Yeah.
So, all right, story number 2. So the Washington Post, speaking of calling people out, the Washington Post is calling out President Biden for making a statement about the Second Amendment completely devoid of facts. So in a speech he delivered last week, Biden advocated for more gun control, calling for stricter background checks, among other things, in order to weed out potential threats. During the speech, he claimed that the Second Amendment has, quote, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. That's not a true statement at all. So the Post awarded Biden 4 Pinocchios this yesterday. David Koppel, the research director and Second Amendment project director for the Independence Institute, wrote in his article, "Everything in that statement is wrong." Upon the ratification of the Second Amendment in 1791, Koppel explained, there were no federal laws about the type of gun you could own, and no states limited the kind of gun you could own, regardless of who you were. So Glenn Kessler, the lead fact checker for the Post, he said it's important for Biden to get the history of the Second Amendment right, particularly since gun control is such a big part of his platform. And he said that's why the Post decided to do its fact check on it. So what's the left saying? Well, like we've talked about before, we know the general breakdown here. The left is in agreement with Biden on increasing gun control, and they're, not too keen to call out when Biden says something that's just flat out inaccurate. Right. So it's the right saying. Well, conservatives took issue with another part of Biden's speech when he criticized people who say that the Second Amendment needs to be preserved in order to give citizens a line of defense against a tyrannical government. Biden at the time, this was last Wednesday, he said that anyone who thinks they need to take on the government would need F-15s and nuclear weapons. So it's kind of like you just need to, it's not possible. And the Washington Examiner last week wrote an article that said that Biden inadvertently made the case for protecting and maybe even bolstering the Second Amendment there. So, why does it matter? I think it's interesting to see the media, Dan, at least acknowledging, particularly the Post, acknowledging Biden's flub here and not trying to just kind of paper over it like I feel like would be their normal MO.
Yeah.
So, and in April, if you remember, Kessler announced that the Post would discontinue its fact-checking database at the end of Biden's 100 days. They do continue, like I said, to fact-check him sometimes. And in December, before Biden was sworn in, I know December of 2020 was like an eternity ago, but CNN's Jim Acosta said that the media should go easier on Biden than they did with Trump because it was just, we were really tough on Biden and they needed to chill a little bit, or tough on Trump, so they needed to chill a little bit. So anyway, it's interesting to see the Post at least acknowledging, that was entirely an untrue statement, but I guess good for them, good for the Post.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, but right. I mean, look, it is hilarious because every politician and every president, I really do believe that transition has happened from activist to just general bias to full-blown activism, because the language that the press used to describe Trump, lying liar, liar, like all these things. Now, when Biden does it, it's just, well, there's nuance here, and we're going to explain this, and this is what he meant. And when you could have done a lot of the same exact things to Trump, Trump certainly had the gist of a lot of things correct, but wasn't always precise in his language. But they never gave him that benefit of the doubt and just would call him a liar. And even though there were many times where the press was just, in particular, with the very fine people on both sides line, in which he condemned white supremacy, and they just refused to accept that he did it. And, and just kept hammering on that. That's full-blown activism. That is not journalism at all. To not give him the benefit of the doubt there, I really do believe a lot of media members made the conscious decision to become activists and say, we have to stop this presidency. And so they work to do that. And then now to see them say, well, we need to go light. Well, what's your MO here? Is it to pick a certain president, or is it to get to the truth? Because it's healthy for both sides to have a press that's peppering them with questions and trying to keep them from letting a narrative get wild, but that doesn't seem to matter anymore.
Yeah, and there's, like you said, the benefit of the doubt thing is so obvious. Like they'll bend over backwards to kind of, like Hem and Haw, like I don't know that he really meant that, but and also there's this dismissal with Trump because everybody knows that Trump is like a flamboyant character. Like he's boisterous, he speaks hyperbolically all the time. He has for his entire public life. And there was no kind of, and I get that he's the president, so you should temper your. Right. In a perfect world, you should temper yourself. Obviously, Trump didn't do that. But there was no, at least, like kind of acknowledgement that, we know that Trump for 50 years has been this, big, loud character who speaks loudly and who exaggerates everything.
Context,
like he's just he's a braggadocious guy.
Yeah.
And like that was just completely like thrown out the window as if that was not a factor. It's like, well, that was very much a factor.
Right. And I think a lot of people on the right they understand that Biden has a history of being prone to gaffes. So,
Yeah.
so you have to sometimes, okay, he just gaffed that because he just sometimes speaks off the cuff and just flubs what he's saying. I think people understand that, but they never give that context to the candidates on the other side, it seems. And particularly now when they just say,
Right.
we're going to let off the gas. It's concerning. But as we said, it's good to see, at least in some instances, to see the obvious truths called out, because the press often misrepresents the gun argument from those on the other
Yeah.
side. So, all right, so let's keep going. Let's head into story number 3 here. And days after a video posted on YouTube highlighted these similarities between sermons at the SBC between Ed Litton and his predecessor, J.D. Greer, they both had this very similar sermon talking about God whispering about sexual sin in the Bible, and the general point of the sermon there was that greed and the sin of greed was much more prevalent in the Bible, and that God is much more concerned about that, and that he only whispers about sexual sin. And the two sermons were very similar as these videos were compared back to back, and that led to people looking at a lot of other videos going on dating back with old sermons from the new SBC president there, Ed Litton, and they found a lot of examples of this with uncredited use of other people's sermons. And so here's what he said. Here's what Litton said. He said, "I'm sorry for not mentioning JD's generosity and ownership of these points. I should have given him credit as I shared these insights." And the main clip that was going around was a 7-minute clip that highlighted those similarities between Greer and Litton, and the allegations of plagiarism came out there. And interestingly, though, Trey, this is where I kind of want to dive in here in a minute, but as users, Gabriel Hughes, who is a pastor as well, noticed this, and he said, "Twice in a row, the Southern Baptist Convention has elected a president who teaches that the Bible whispers about sexual sin. Wouldn't you think that appointing leaders who preach that the Bible whispers about sexual sin is the wrong way to fight sex abuse?" As you remember, the SBC has been, under fire for allegedly mishandling sexual abuse claims. And so while they did argue that homosexuality is sinful, both Greer and Litton definitely just made these same comments. And it just seemed to be a message of, and again, I didn't watch the whole sermon, so I'd have to really watch the whole thing to fully judge on how it came across. But at least in these clips that are going around, it certainly seems like, and this probably wasn't the intent, but it certainly makes sexual sin seem like, oh, well, this one's a lesser sin, and these sins of greed and judgmentalism are the real sins that we have to go after. So this one, not really a left right issue so much, Trey, at this point, but they haven't caught on to that one yet. But what I wanted to focus on is that they're all focused on the copying, but it seems particularly not helpful to sort of sugarcoat the sin of sexual sin, especially when we know that sexual sin is it's like one of the most prevalent sins in the church that goes unaddressed oftentimes, as evidenced with the SBC and not handling it properly. So an interesting dynamic happening here, and hopefully the lead's not being buried. I mean, it's not good to plagiarize either, but I mean, it seems like he knows Greer, and so it wasn't like this was maliciously stolen or something like that. He just didn't credit it while he was giving his sermon.
Yeah, I think like you, I haven't listened to the full sermon and the full context of Litton's preaching, to know where he falls on a lot of these issues. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty bizarre to me for somebody to say, someone who knows Scripture and knows the Bible. Certainly, he's more learned than I am. But I can look at Scripture and know the Bible enough to say, I would even be comfortable saying the Bible kind of yells about sexual immorality. Yeah. I think the Bible is pretty clear about sexuality. I think Paul talks about it so heavily and so frequently in all of his letters to believers. in the early church, talking about, I mean, if you look at all of his letters, sexual immorality is like at the top of every sin that he's concerned with, because it's a sin against your own body. It's a sin, you're a temple of God. So any sin that you commit with your body is particularly egregious because of the consequences are so high. Like the dealing with it is so high. We've talked about it with like pornography, for example, so often here on this podcast. We've written about it at Faithwire, and we have an e-course, the Set Free e-course, which you can get on faithwire.com if you're interested. So like we've talked about the importance of sexual sin. So it's just odd to use the word whispers in association with scripture on sexual sin, because I think that's just certainly far from the truth. And it's a weird tone to strike when the SBC, like so many Christian denominations, is right now dealing with some sexual immorality within its own ranks. Seems like an odd way of wording sexual sin.
Yeah, and then the focus, and again, that focus then becomes on the plagiarism, and it's kind of like, well, maybe we're talking about the secondary issue here. Maybe we're whispering about the wrong sin that we're focusing on here while we're talking about plagiarism. So, hopefully they can straighten this out. Obviously, as we've talked about the SBC and the leadership changes, the influence this group has. So, of course, be praying that they can sort of straighten up there and get on the proper path.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, story number 4. So in a now viral video, a woman tore into staffers at a Los Angeles spa after she encountered a nude biological male walking around in the women's section. I can't believe this is a story, but anyway. So the unnamed woman rebuked the Wee Spa for purportedly allowing the male, who identifies as a transgender female, to use a section of the facility specifically for females, according to footage shared on Twitter. And if you're watching the live stream, you can see some of it now. So she said, "So it's okay. I just want to be clear with you." She's telling this to the staffer. It's okay for a man to go into the women's section, show his penis around the other women with young girls who are underage. The woman asked, "Your spa, Wee Spa, condones that. Is that what you're saying?" So most of the spa workers' comments were unintelligible because the staffer was wearing a mask and was behind plexiglass. It was loud in there, so it's tough to hear. But at one point, the biological male sexual orientation was brought up as a justification, like, well, we can't really do anything because this person identifies as a transgender female. The woman, though, said that didn't matter. She kind of pointed out the obvious, because she said the person's anatomy made it clear that he was a biological male in a locker room area in a section reserved for women who are changing, and kind of reiterated there were little girls, there were young children in the room changing alongside their moms. And this guy was allowed to come in naked, and it was okay because he just said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm a trans woman." So what's the left saying? Well, we know the typical party lines here, as illogical as they might seem. Interestingly, though, there were plenty of social media users who came to the woman's defense. Even one person, which I found this interesting, who identifies as transsexual, condemned the biological male who entered the women's space nude. The person on Twitter said, "If you claim to be a transgender woman and you aren't just as upset as the woman in the video, you are part of the problem." The person went on to write, "If you claim to be a transgender woman and your first reaction is that poor transgender woman, transphobia is awful, you are part of the problem." So interesting that's the tone that Twitter user struck there. What's the right saying? Well, at one point during her encounter at the front desk, another man, a customer, you're seeing that in the video right now, came up to her and tried to explain to her why it was okay for the biological male who identifies as female to be in a women-only space. And several conservatives on social media pointed out the irony of a man talking down to a woman about why she needs to be okay with a biological male in a biological female's space. There's one Twitter user, Dan, who wrote, "I love the dude. I love the dude at the end trying to lecture a group of women on what a woman is." To me, that tweet kind of wins the whole argument here.
Yeah.
But it's just, I'd like to think or hope at least that this kind of stuff is a tipping point for people. It's unfortunate that these kinds of things have to happen for it to be like, oh wait, maybe we've gone a bit too far. It seems that it's not going to bother anybody until this kind of stuff happens.
Yeah,
because I guess it's like abstract. So it's like, oh, until you actually see the biological male walking around naked, then it's like, oh, wait, when we actually live out these philosophies, it's a really bad thing.
Well, and again, the argument used to justify letting someone like that go into a female locker room is that they have to feel comfortable too. Well, what about the comfort of the others, right? Like you have to understand that not everyone is going to be celebrating this maneuver, and you just can't force your way in there and just bully your way in there and say, well, everyone's going to have to accept it because it's Pride Month, so here we go. It's a big world out there, and not everyone's just going to love the fact that you think you're a woman, and so you can walk. And again, the other thing here is, I think all the instances are wrong as a Christian, obviously, for our biblical views on what a man and a woman are. But this case is even different than, say, like the athlete's case, where the person has to to compete in the Olympics, they have to have their testosterone levels and all these other things. If you go into a spa, what's to stop some pervert from just saying, well, I'm a woman, so I'm a transgender, transgender, so I'm going in the women's locker room, and then just go stand around looking at all the women with, getting changed. What's to stop anyone from doing that? That's just a one-off. Anyone can do that. And I think it's particularly dangerous in that scenario because there's no evidence. You don't have to have any evidence that, well, I'm actually living my life this way. And not that that makes it any better, but I think this is even a worse case than what we're already seeing.
Yeah. And the woman in the video, it's about probably about 4 minutes long if you watch, because it's two separate videos. Oh, there's Piper.
And Piper's fired up about it too, yeah.
Yeah. But she she brings that point up, like the double standard, like this would only happen. Like we're only going to manipulate biological women.
Yeah.
Like we're not actually going to hurt men. Like this isn't going to hurt guys.
Right. And the absurdity, you pointed it out well, the absurdity of a guy trying to lecture a woman to tell her, hey, you need to let that biological man walk around naked in your presence along with those kids. What's wrong with you? Why are you hating so much? Like you said, the absurdity of it it's just, hopefully it's so apparent at some point that this stuff becomes just a remnant of the past. So, all right, that is...
one can hope.
Yeah, one can hope. That is all the time we have for today. We will be back here tomorrow with more news from a Christian perspective. As always, head on over to faithwire.com and cbnnews.com. God bless. See you back here tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Okay, podcast taping over. We're clear. Piper can yell now.
She can bark her head off now.
Yeah. But I should go back to the video. Now, the video, if you're going to go watch the video, which is linked, we only linked to it in the article because there is some colorful language used.
Yeah.
There's some blunt language used. The woman's not happy, and she states the obvious, but does it in a very blunt manner. And so the language, a little bit of a language warning there, but it is sort of, honestly, you hear a lot about people being bold and people standing up. And it's at that point in society now where I know a guy in the NFL just came out as gay and everyone's like, what a courageous move. And I read through the comments underneath it, thousands of comments. I didn't see one negative comment. This person, so the tide of culture is going that way. So when somebody does this, I think that actually has a little more courage to it. Because as you saw, what did they say when they stood up to a guy running around naked in a women's locker room? She was called the hate monger. So I do think it takes more courage to stand up in this direction.
And it was interesting to see something I didn't mention in the podcast is the woman standing next to her, you can see in the video right now. Mm-hmm. When she heard what she was saying, she said, then
I'm
I
out
want
of
to
here.
refund my membership.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm not going to stay here anymore. So I was like, one, good for her. But two, isn't it kind of crazy when you're watching the video to see the employees like not fazed by it at all?
No.
Like, they're just kind of like, why are you making a big deal out of this?
Yeah. Uh,
I mean, and I get like they're in an uncomfortable situation because they're
They're
working,
on
they're on the
camera.
clock. Like,
Yeah.
so I want to be gracious to them because, they're just staffers. So I'm not blaming them. But it is weird to think like, because my reaction as an employee would be like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe that's going on. Like, so, but it's just interesting. Like you mentioned, the tide of culture has normalized so much of this stuff.
Yeah, and I will also extend a little grace to the employees because it is a tough spot because when someone's got the
For
camera out,
sure.
you know, you're just going through your day. Sometimes you might not register what's happening. You're busy. You got some things going on, and someone's yelling, and
Yeah.
maybe you don't quite digest what's actually happening. And even if you do, it's you've got to be thinking in your head at this point. This is going viral one way or the other,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I'm gonna look like the bad guy to almost no matter what I do. That's where I'm just like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm gonna get you a manager, and I'll go ahead and
Yeah.
get somebody above me to go ahead and talk about that. if
Yeah.
I'm one
So
of
I
these
guess,
guys at the desk, right?
I guess I'll say to them, good for them for keeping their composure. I get, because I know that's a tough,
Yeah, I think he
like you
got a
said,
little. I think
not
the
a fun place to
mask.
be in.
I think the mask saved him a little bit, Trey, because you couldn't really hear what he was saying.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
so maybe he was being snarky and saying like, "Why are you so bigoted?" But all it sounded like was, So
Oh, man.
the mask sort of saved him there. But
Yeah, for sure.
oh, crazy times,
Crazy
crazy
world we
times.
live
So,
in.
but yeah. So all right, well, got the video cranking back up there. We had to take a little hiatus from the vids. Should be back to these every day. So
Yeah.
all right, we shall see y'all back here tomorrow.